Once upon a time, Britain was the boss of the world. No, seriously, it was the boss. The strongest army, the most money, and a ton of land, even more than Russia. What does that mean? It means over 13 million square miles of land, all under British control. But now, only a tiny piece of that empire is left. About 95,000 square miles. That's about the same size as a small US state called Oregon. Crazy, right? You might think this happened over a few centuries, but nope. Most of that land disappeared in less than 50 years. So the big question is, how did Britain go from ruling the world to being just a regular island in Europe? Well, let's go back a few centuries and see where it all began. Map of Europe in the 16th century with a small England. Back in the late 1500s, England was like a rookie kid among giants like Spain and Portugal. Everyone was looking to discover new lands, and England wanted to carve out a spot for itself. And that's when an idea sparked in their minds. Let's head to America. In 1607, the English built their first colony in America called Jamestown. It didn't take long before more colonies sprang up, and something called the 13 Colonies was formed. But let me clear something up. The real money wasn't in America, nor in Europe. It was hiding in the warm and humid Caribbean. Yes, sugar. That sweet and delicious food was worth its weight in gold back then in Europe. Britain snatched islands like Barbados and Jamaica from Spain, turning them into sugar plantations. The result? Money, money, money. With this sugar, Britain became so wealthy it could now dominate the world. But wait, this is only half the story. On the other side of the world, Britain spotted another treasure, India. India was full of spices, fabrics, and money. Britain couldn't pass up such an opportunity. So, Queen Elizabeth said, "Let's start a company, call it the East India Company, and send it to India." And thus, the British East India Company was born. At first, they just wanted to trade. But over time, competing with Portugal and the Netherlands made the company form its own army and ally with Indian kings. Slowly, this small company turned into a giant that had half of India in its grasp. By the mid-1700s, Britain was no longer just about trade. No, now it was right in the middle of the action, grabbing land, taking resources, and building an empire that spanned multiple continents. The wealth of India poured in like a flood, from spices and fabrics to raw materials, straight into Britain's pockets. Merchants and British officials got rich, really rich. And controlling India became the cornerstone of Britain's empire. But beneath the shiny surface, something else was brewing. Discontent, dissatisfaction, and a hidden anger among the local people. Fast forward to the 1800s. By now, Britain was officially at its peak. The Industrial Revolution had begun, factories were churning out goods left and right, and the resources coming from the colonies made everything faster and bigger. With trains and steamships, transporting goods and power became easier. The British Empire was growing, and no one was stopping it until a big Frenchman entered the scene. Yes, Napoleon Bonaparte. Like Britain, he was looking for dominance. But not over the seas, he wanted control in the heart of Europe. Britain, not wanting any country to control the continent, stood against France. Britain started forming alliances with European countries to confront Napoleon. And set up a tough naval blockade to crush France's economy. In response, Napoleon came up with a plan. The Continental System. An economic blockade against Britain. But, oh no, this plan hurt France more than it hurt Britain. And finally, the famous Battle of Trafalgar in 1805 changed everything. The British Royal Navy defeated Napoleon at sea and regained control of the oceans. After this victory, Britain, like a professional hunter, seized more lands. From South Africa to Sri Lanka and various islands around the world. These lands not only boosted Britain's trade but also strengthened its dominance over the seas. And by 1858, India, which had always been called the jewel in the crown of the empire, officially became a British colony. Now, the British government directly controlled India. Britain turned India into a money-making factory. Resources, labor, markets, everything was set for an ever-hungry empire. And in Africa? It was chaotic there too. By the late 19th century, Europe had officially set its sights on Africa. A mad race to carve up a continent whose map was still incomplete. The main motivation? Africa's vast resources and its strategic locations. Europeans, from Britain and France to Germany and Belgium, rushed into the dark continent at full speed. Everyone wanted to grab more, and paid less attention to the fact that Africa already had its own countries and nations. This division was formalized at the Berlin Conference in 1884. At this meeting, Europe divided up Africa among themselves, and no, not a single African was invited to the conference. With its powerful navy and massive economy, Britain was able to seize important countries. From Egypt and Sudan to Kenya and Nigeria. These weren't just names, these were sources of gold, diamonds, and rubber. And they made Britain richer by the day. To the point where they almost controlled a quarter of the globe. But no giant is without its weaknesses. The first major blow came from the American Revolution. Britain saw its American colonies as cash cows. But the Americans were fed up with unjust taxes. When France came to help America, Britain found itself in trouble. And in 1783, it lost the 13 American colonies. A humiliating defeat. But Britain still had plenty of land, for now. After this defeat, it changed its strategy. It turned to Asia, Africa, and Oceania. But the cracks in the empire's armor were getting bigger. The 20th century arrived, bringing with it the greatest crisis in history, World War I. Britain went to war in 1914, still one of the world's top powers. But by 1918, it came back with debt, death, and extreme exhaustion. The war drained Britain's financial resources. And it had to borrow heavily from America. Interestingly, Britain couldn't fight alone. Soldiers from India, Canada, Australia, Africa, and the Caribbean were called upon. But when they returned home, they had a question. We fought for Britain, got wounded, died, so why are we still second-class citizens? And this marked the beginning of waves of independence movements. The war not only shook Britain's economy, but it also weakened the political foundations of the empire. Like Ireland, which had always sought independence. But now, it was moving faster than ever toward separation. The empire was still standing. But it was shaking. Colonies, from India to Ireland and Egypt, had fought in World War I. And now, they wanted one thing, freedom. The war showed just how dependent Britain was on its colonies. And the colonies realized this. The years between the two world wars were like a storm. Nationalist movements were rising all over the empire. From Africa to Asia, people were no longer willing to tolerate oppression. Ireland gained independence in 1922. And this sent a clear message to the rest. Hey! Breaking away from Britain is possible. In Africa, the people of Kenya and Nigeria also started serious resistance. And in India, a silent revolution was brewing. The leader of this movement? Mahatma Gandhi. With a simple philosophy, non-violent resistance. Boycotts, marches, civil disobedience. And of course, the Amritsar massacre in 1919, which ignited the hearts of many. All of this increased the pressure on Britain, until it was clear to everyone that India's independence was just a matter of time. And then, boom! World War II. If World War I was a punch to the face, World War II was a bomb dropped right in the heart of the empire. Britain, which barely survived the First World War, this time officially knelt down. And the world had changed. America and the Soviet Union were now the major powers, and both were anti-colonial. The first major fall? India. In 1947, Britain officially lost India. And from there, the domino effect began. Ghana became the first African country to gain independence in 1957. The 1960s? A nightmare for the empire. Colonies separated one by one. Holding on to these countries was no longer economically viable. Resistance was increasing, and the world was watching. An empire that took centuries to build collapsed in just a few decades. By 1990, there was almost nothing left. Only one piece remained, Hong Kong. Britain had ruled since the 1800s. But according to a 99-year lease, it had to hand it over to China in 1997. And that was the last page of the empire's story. Today, Britain only has 14 small territories, like the Falkland Islands, Gibraltar, and Bermuda. And that empire where the sun never set? Now, it's just a memory. So, what does Britain have now? A history full of victories and defeats, a fancy accent, and tea, lots of tea. The empire is gone, but its impact is still everywhere, from the English language to driving on the left side of the road. And sure, it's not the boss of the world anymore. But it's still an island everyone's heard of. Until the next video, just remember, the world is always changing, and every empire eventually falls, even the biggest ones.